Want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humongous.
Michael Jackson's memory is being torn to pieces. A new film, Leaving Neverland, focuses on two men roughly in their 30s who say that Michael Jackson abused them sexually when they were kids. The stories of how Michael wowed them, exhilarated them, and seduced them are very convincing. But I can't read more than a tiny number of them, these stories. Why? Because Michael Jackson was one of the most important people in my life. He expanded my sense of what a human being could do and be. He had more awe, wonder, and commitment to his fans than any human I had ever imagined. So now I'm left with a question. And if you are a Michael Jackson fan, you may be left with this question too. How do I keep what was good about Michael Jackson alive in my heart? How do I deal with what may well have been his forbidden sexual proclivities? How do I nurture the possibility that these new sex stories may not be true? Here's how I got into this mess. Once upon a time in 1971, I did a strange thing for a science person. I turned down 4 grad school fellowships and what is now today called neuroscience. I jumped ship from academia, and I went on a field expedition into a territory I knew nothing about, popular culture. Remember Charles Darwin's 5 years of adventure on a ship surveying the coast of South America, his voyage of the Beagle? Remember his collection of specimens and of wild adventures? This exit from academia was my voyage of the Beagle. I was on a hunt for the gods inside of you and me. The passions that take us over, produce ecstasies, yank us out of our normal selves, and bring us in contact with something bigger than we are. By sheer luck and accident, I landed in rock and roll, a territory where that ecstatic experience happens whenever there's a truly great concert. The ecstasies I was hunting happen in performers, when they feel the individuals in the audience melt into a collective force, like a giant amoeba. They feel when that amoebic mass of group energy reaches the pseudopod out to them, when it pumps its energy through the pseudopod into the empty pipe that they become, and when it gives the performer the equivalent of an out-of-body experience, an experience in which a force far greater than he or she is dances him like a puppet on a string for an hour, then leaves him empty when he walks off the stage. Rock and roll was where the gods I was hunting for came alive. 5 years after I abandoned my grad school fellowships in 1976, I started the biggest PR firm in the music industry and worked with Prince, Bob Marley, Bette Midler, Billy Joel, Paul Simon, Peter Gabriel, David Byrne, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, Run DMC, Aerosmith, Queen, Kiss, and AC/DC. But the most important person I worked with was Michael Jackson. And the gods that I'd been hunting were more alive in Michael Jackson than in any other human I'd ever met. I'm not supposed to tell you this, but I've written a book called Einstein, Michael Jackson and Me, A Search for Soul in the Power Pits of Rock and Roll about my music days. I'm not supposed to tell you because Einstein, Michael Jackson and Me will not be published until the fall of 2020. But here are 2 stories from that book that explain what Michael Jackson meant to me. 2 stories followed by the tortured position that Leaving Neverland puts me in, and that it may put you in too. My first meeting with Michael didn't come until 4 months after I'd said yes to working with his brothers. I was with Michael's brothers at Marlin's Pool House in Encino, a tiny 2-story building with 1 room per floor, in the backyard next to Marlin's pool. By then, I'd done my homework. I'd read thousands of articles on Michael. I'd compiled a dossier on the Jacksons' lives. One thing all the articles agreed on was this: Michael was not a normal human being. The articles called him a bubble baby, a person who would shrink from your touch. But the fact is that neither Michael nor I had experienced a normal childhood. Neither of us had been raised among other kids. As a result, I didn't know the common rituals of normal life. I had to teach myself by watching other people as if they were laboratory rats and as if I were a scientist from Mars. One of the rituals an acquaintance had taught me when I was 19 years old was the handshake between strangers. You know, you see somebody you've never met before, but who others want you to meet. You walk up to him or her, you stick out your hand, and you say, "Hello, my name is," and fill in your name here, and he or she says her name back. This was a ritual I had never used. But when Michael opened the pool house's screen door, I walked to him, struck out my hand, and said, "Hi, I'm Howard." I knew what would happen. The articles had explained it. Michael would recoil from my touch. But that's not what happened. Michael Jackson put out his hand, shook mine, and replied, "Hi, I'm Michael." Michael's voice was normal, and so was his handshake. The media stories were false, but thousands of press people had parroted them as truths. Something strange was happening in the sphere of press perception we are handed as fact, at least as it pertained to Michael Jackson. A few minutes later, Michael and I climbed the cramped stairs to the tiny second-floor room where Marlon Jackson kept his recording equipment. I'd written a press release, and I wanted Michael's approval. We found places to sit on the stacks of amplifiers and keyboards. I read the press release out loud to Michael, and as I did, Michael's body softened and slid horizontal a bit more with each paragraph, and his face opened with, "That's beautiful," he said in a soft, emotional voice when I was finished. "Did you write that?" The fact was I had. And the fact was that writing press releases was not just a hack job for me. It was an art. I'd edited a literary magazine that had won 2 National Academy of Poets prizes, and in the decades since my involvement with the Jacksons, the Washington Post has called the writing in my books beautiful. But no one else had ever seen the art hidden in the craft. Michael had. Once Michael had approved of the press release, we went back downstairs to the one-room first floor. Lining the walls were boardwalk video game machines only really rich amusement arcades could afford in those days. And in the center of the room, hogging up most of the space, was a billiard table. The Jacksons were scheduled to have a meeting with an art director from the record company, CBS, so the group could decide on the Victory Tour album cover. They wanted me to be in on it. When the art director arrived, she bore the portfolios of 5 artists. Portfolios she stacked at one end of the pool table's green felt playing surface. These were not just the black vinyl portfolios most commercial artists use to display their work. Every one of them was a custom-made presentation case made of hand-tooled leather or rich cherry wood. And every one was from a legendary artist, an artist at the very top of his field. I knew. I had snuck out of my 4 graduate fellowships in neuroscience and into a field I knew nothing about, pop culture, by co-founding a commercial art studio, and I had made it on the cover of Art Direction magazine. I used to carry a portfolio like these from one art director's office to another. Not the hand-tooled variety. The one I carried was vinyl. And the artist portfolios on the table before me were from former competitors who were legends. We were all bunched together on the opposite side of the pool table from the art director. Michael was in the center. I stood next to him on his left, and the brothers were crowded around us on either side, which meant my right arm was up against Michael's and my knee was next to his knee. The CBS art director slid the first of the portfolios toward Michael. He opened the first page slowly, just enough to see perhaps an inch of the image. As Michael took in that postage stamp-sized corner, his knees began to buckle. His elbows bent, and all he could say was, "Oh," a soft orgasmic, "Oh." In that one syllable, and in his body language, you could feel what he was saying. You could feel it from his arm to yours. You know the poem by William Blake? I'm sure you do. To see a world in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. The intense ambition of that poem the overwhelming desire to see the infinite in the tiniest of things was alive in Michael Jackson. More alive than anything of the sort I'd ever witnessed. Michael saw the infinite in an inch. As Michael opened the page farther, inch by inch, his knees and elbows bent even more, and his oohs, his sounds of aesthetic orgasm, grew even more intense. Standing elbow to elbow with him, you could feel him discovering things in the brush and ink strokes that even the artist never saw. By the time Michael had opened the full page, his body and voice expressed an ecstasy, an epiphany. Michael felt the beauty of the work with every cell of his being. I had never encountered anything like it in my life. Look, I worked with Prince, Bob Marley, Peter Gabriel, Billy Joel, and Bette Midler, some of the most talented people of my generation, not to mention astronauts Buzz Aldrin and Edgar Mitchell. And not one of them had the quality of wonder that came alive in Michael Jackson. In the coming months, I would slowly learn that Michael saw the wonder in everything. His quality of astonishment was beyond anything most of us humans can conceive. Let's skip ahead in Einstein, Michael Jackson, and me to one more story. One more story that may explain who Michael Jackson really was. One afternoon at 4 p.m., I was sitting at my aircraft carrier-sized chrome and burl desk on East 55th Street in Manhattan at 4 p.m. when a call came in. You've got to be out here at 11 o'clock tonight. Michael is canceling his tour, and you're the only one he'll listen to. I told my receptionist to call the car service and get me a flight to LA. Then I grabbed my red nylon knapsack and headed down the 5 flights of stairs. The nylon knapsack carried a TRS-100 laptop, a razor, and a spare shirt. As for heading down the stairs, not the elevator, I prefer getting the exercise. I arrived in LA at roughly 10 p.m., grabbed a rental car, and headed to the address I had been given. The destination was the lot of one of the top film studios, something on a par with Paramount Pictures. A film studio lot at night is a dark and heart-crushing sight. It consists of roughly a dozen aircraft hangar-sized buildings, huge, high, open space, arched structures, big enough to house at least one Boeing 747 each. Most are eerily dark and silent, and even when they are lit, they seem to swallow all joy and transform it into gloom. I was ushered into the only lit arched hangar. At one end of this enormous building, the Jacksons were rehearsing on a huge stage that had been designed especially for their tour. Outside the studio were trailers set up as dressing rooms. I waited while the Jacksons finished their rehearsal. Then Michael, his brother, and I all filed into one of the darkened trailers. I'm not sure we ever even bothered to turn on the lights. The trailer had long padded vinyl maroon banquettes on each side and one short banquette next to the entrance facing the trailer's rear. That short banquette was the power seat, the throne. Michael took it. I took the corner of the banquette at his left hand, his non-threatening side. Michael explained what was going on. Jackie Jackson, Michael's brother, he said, is the best dancer I've ever seen. He choreographs all of our shows, and he's amazing on stage. But, said Michael, he's had arthroscopic surgery for a bone chip in his knee, and the bone chip surgery isn't healing as fast as we thought. I can't go on stage without Jackie, so I want to postpone the tour until Jackie is better. Why not just use the rest of the brothers and go out on schedule? Michael said, Jackie is the best dancer I've ever seen. I owe my kids the best. Without Jackie, Michael explained, he could not overwhelm his kids with amazement. So I have to wait for Jackie to heal, he said. Why? To give his kids the highest grade of astonishment he could possibly achieve. This is where Michael's quality of awe, wonder, and surprise came in. God had given him the ability to see the infinite in the tiniest of things. And Michael felt he owed that experience to his audience. He felt God had given him an exuberantly supercharged sense of the world, and it was Michael's obligation to give that bliss to others, specifically to his kids. When Michael spoke of his absolute obligation to those kids, I had a vision, whatever the hell a vision is. I saw Michael's ribs as golden gates. I saw them open, and I saw tens of millions of kids, Michael's kids, beyond those gates, the tens of millions alive at all times in Michael's chest. Michael felt it was his job on planet Earth to love, protect, and amaze those kids, to surprise them, to open their eyes with awe and wonder. Then Michael finally revealed why the tour had been so vulnerable to accusations that everything was going to collapse, fall apart, and kill audience members because, quote, nobody we know has been hired to handle this tour. That's what the press said. No truly professional is working on it, said the press, trying to destroy the Jacksons. Look, a square inch of an artist's illustration had made Michael Jackson's knees buckled. It had lit him with a sense of awe and surprise. Michael wanted to give that gobsmacking, delight-walloping sense of surprise to his kids. To do it, he'd started working on the stage, the lighting, and the humdingers, the Lollapaloozas, and eyeball centers from magicians and costumers over a year in advance. He'd looked for the top talent he could find. Then he'd made everyone he hired sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. He wanted every detail of the tour to be a secret. He wanted to spring a total wonder, a brain flummoxer. He wanted to spring the ultimate surprise. The people Michael had hired were not amateurs, far from it. They were the creme de la creme. But the utter secrecy had opened Michael to accusations that everything was going to fall apart, and that kids and their parents would be killed at Jackson concerts by falling lighting equipment, by security that couldn't handle gangs running rampant down the aisles with knives. Michael was vulnerable because of his showmanship and because of something even more important, his total commitment to his kids, his total commitment to his audience's almost supernatural astonishment. That also explained the high ticket price, $30, the price that outraged the press. The ticket price was high because Michael was intent on giving a show on a level no one had ever seen, a tour that would cost a fortune to mount, a tour that would carry more equipment than any previous musical tour in history. According to a much later story than UPI, that tour carried more than 365 tons of theatrical gear. Again, Jackie was the best dancer Michael had ever seen, and Michael had seen and studied every major pop culture dancer of the 20th century, from James Brown and Jackie Wilson to Fred Astaire. There was no way he'd allow his kids to be cheated by not seeing the best. There was an army of kids in Michael's chest, and there was an arsenal of harsh truths in mine. I explained how the press was making a mockery of the Jacksons, seeing negatives wherever they could. I explained the misperception that the entire tour was being handled by amateurs and that its equipment would collapse, killing Michael's kids. I told Michael that postponing the tour would make all these predictions of catastrophe look as if they were about to come true. Postponing the tour would destroy Michael's credibility. It would convince Michael's fans not to buy tickets. And if he postponed, his kids would never get the stunning surprises that he had planned. Michael and I shared one thing in common. We believe in our truths down to the very core of our being. And when we explained ourselves, we could come across with the force of prophets. Both of us. It was two Charlton Hestons parting the Red Sea, going head to head. Michael understood what I was saying. More important, he saw the need to be on time with the tour. He changed his mind, bless him. And he taught me one more lesson about who and what he was. Put yourself in my position. Above all other things, you are a scientist. Science is your religion. It's been your religion since you were 10 years old. And the first two rules of science are, number one, the truth at any price, including the price of your life. And number two, look at things right under your nose as if you've never seen them before. Then proceed from there. Rule number one is the rule of courage. And rule number two is the rule of awe, the rule of amazement and wonder. These are not just rules of science. They are rules of art, and they are rules of life. Very few people know it. Even fewer people live it. but Michael was it. You would learn step by step that Michael Jackson incarnated those two rules in every follicle of his being. Michael was the closest you'd ever seen to an angel or a saint. That's just two of my encounters with Michael Jackson. You'll be able to read the rest in roughly October 2020 in the book Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me, A Search for Soul in the Power Pits of Rock and Roll. So how do I deal with the memories of a person I felt could literally expand the perceptual boundaries of humanity? How do I hold on to the best of a person I loved for his ability to expand the human soul? How do I hold on to that? Michael is not the first seriously flawed historical figure we have a hard time letting go of. He's not the first crucial icon who had sexual aberrations. When John Fitzgerald Kennedy was president, he had a steady stream of women in his bed, despite the gorgeousness of his wife, Jackie Kennedy, and despite the obligations of the presidency. One of those women between his sheets was Marilyn Monroe. Do we throw away, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country? And we choose to do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard? How about Mahatma Gandhi? In Britain's The Independent, Gandhi's biographer, Jad Adams, exposes, quote, Gandhi's practice of sleeping next to naked girls, close quote. Nubile girls, teenage girls, sometimes girls who were the young wives of other men. Concludes Adams, in fact, Gandhi was sex mad. And how about the man Gandhi influenced for the betterment of all humankind, Martin Luther King? When he was on the road, King cheated on his wife, constantly. Said his companion, Ralph Abernathy, who often traveled with King, quote, Martin and I were away more often than we were at home. And while this was no excuse for extramarital relations, it was a reason. Some men are better able to bear such deprivations than others. I remember, continues Abernathy, on more than one occasion, sitting on a stage and having Martin turn to me to say, see that woman giving me the eye, the one in the red dress? I wouldn't be able to pick her out at such a distance. But already she had somehow conveyed to him her attraction, and he in turn had responded to it. Later I would see them talking together as if they had known one another forever. I was always a little bewildered at how strongly and unerringly this mutual attraction operates. Because Martin Luther King preached fidelity, but was not faithful himself, do we throw away I had a dream? Someone pointed out to me that there was a difference between these men and Michael Jackson. If the accusations of leaving Neverland are true, Michael was seducing young boys, children who fell in love with him, and children he loved too. Which leaves me where I began. I have believed ever since I met Michael Jackson that he set a new standard for humanity. I have believed that if only the public knew who Michael really was, that knowledge would expand the perceptual frontiers of humanity. How do I deal with leaving Neverland? And how do I not let what Michael represented to me be tossed away? Even more, how do I take what I learned from Michael and use it to open the eyes of humanity? I hope the answer is in Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me, A Search for Soul in the Power Pits of Rock and Roll. This is Howard the Humongous, speaking to you from the future. It's your job and my job to make. Or, want to know why? Ask how. And now for that sleazy, sloppy, insidious, salacious little off button.